Hey, Alex.
Yeah, Garrett.
I have an idea for a movie.
What's your idea for a movie?
I thought it would be really cool if we built a maze and then put a skillet at the center of the whole thing. What do you think we should call it?
I don't know.
I think we should call it Pan's Labyrinth. Merp, 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 boop, doop, doop.
Welcome once again, my friends, to another episode of the Digital Drive-In Podcast. My name is Alex. I'm joined, as always, by my horrible co-host, Garrett. Say hi.
Hi.
And as you know, if you are a fan of the show already, you don't have to know what's coming up next, actually. But if you're new to the show, on the Digital Drive-In Podcast, we talk about all of our favorite movies and why we love those movies and what makes them so great. Last week, we talked about a video game, but the week before that, we talked about Brawl and Cell Block 99, which was Garrett's pick, correct?
Yep.
And now we're doing a film that came out about 10 years before, and maybe 11. And this one was my pick, and it is, in case you didn't see the title, Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth. Garrett, what is Pan's Labyrinth about? I broke this thing.
You broke what thing?
Something
Should I be
that I was
concerned?
that I was playing with my hand. Never mind.
Well, stop playing with things and pay attention
Fine.
to the podcast. It is about a 10-year-old girl who has to move places with her mother because she has a new stepfather, and all things aren't happy in fairy tale land. So, in order to perhaps cope with it, she comes up with things in a fairy tale way of dealing with horrible things that are going on, or there are actual fairy tale things going on and she just happens to enter into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of a bit of a coming of age story, a bit of a trying to find your real father story, a bit of horror.
And a whole lot
Of lovin'.
McLovin.
It says it right here on the driver's license.
We should do Super Bad.
I've never seen it.
You've never seen it?
Nope.
Wow.
Here's a little fuck.
Little anecdote.
Not anecdote. I was trying to say
Story.
here's a little secret
Parable.
about me. Yeah. It is I don't really like coming of age stories.
Oh boy, and why is that? Because you never came of age?
That's it. No, I was born an old man. I don't know.
You came of age when you came out.
I don't know. It's like I didn't have the same trappings of childhood as a lot of people did. I'm not saying I knew everything when I was young or anything, because I still
He's the wisest man in the entire world.
Right. I mean, it's not anything like that. It was, because I'm still naive about things and I'm almost 40. So it's not that. But it was just the way people go about figuring things out is completely different than me. So I don't put myself into the movie, and I don't necessarily like a movie of someone trying to figure things out about themselves. Whereas my issue is always figuring things out about external things, but internal things are really easy for me to figure out and break down. So all my issues, air quotes issues, are external, even though that's completely not true because everyone has issues internal. But I don't know. It's just not as interesting. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, or that movies that come from that perspective, it is a different perspective, and so it's interesting to see them. But just in general, I will not be as excited about a coming of age story as Mark Kermode. I always want to say Kermode from the UK. That's his favorite movie style. So any movie that when he did his best of the decade list, half of the movies on there were coming of age stories.
Right.
And I think that's like Moonlight and a bunch of movies like that, because it deals with those subjects that are air quotes universal. A lot of people can put themselves into that spot, but because I can't, and I can't get past the characterization in that way, that's not as interesting.
Right. Now, thankfully, in Superbad's case, it's not necessarily a coming of age story as much as I just need to get the booze. So, but Pan's Labyrinth is very much
doesn't that sound hilarious?
in a way, a coming of age story. Well, if you didn't grow up in the thousands, I don't know if Superbad would grab you as much. It's kind of like the Dazed and Confused of the 2000s era.
Yeah, and that movie was fine. So I mean, I'm sure I wouldn't hate it, and I'm sure I would laugh at things, but I think all in all.
Oh yeah, but this isn't the Superbad podcast as much as I want it to be.
I mean, we can even cut that out if you want.
Oh no, anyway. It was a good talk because it does lead into Pan's Labyrinth, which is sort of a coming of age story in a way. Not really too much, I don't think. It is at the same time though. It's weird. I don't know. It's like, because some of the experiences Ophelia has throughout this aren't exactly universal. Maybe the fears of like meeting a step parent would be, but obviously nowadays people would probably know their step parent before they go move into their house.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, and I'm sure we will get into this more, is it's more of a classic telling of a fairy tale.
Right.
And one of the special features on the Criterion specifically has Del Toro and the writer of the novelization of Pan's Labyrinth talking about how they feel that fairy tales are more representative of reality than people that actually like try to do things as being as real as possible. So it's just a different perspective on the storytelling devices that they like to use.
But of course, Pan's Labyrinth is directed by one Guillermo del Toro, who is one of my personal favorite directors. And I know, Garrett, you're not as hot as him as I am.
I mean, if you want to talk about like visual acuity or building worlds, there are very few, especially modern directors, that are like him. So he definitely has a very distinct visual style that you recognize right away from his films.
Right. And I think that's what grabbed me most. I've talked about it before, maybe on this podcast and certainly on others when I was on the Films from the Basement podcast, how much of a fan I am of creature design and of just monsters and such like that. And obviously Del Toro is one of those masters at that. He has a lot of, pretty much all of his films contain creatures and monsters, if not all of them.
Oh yeah, I would say all of them.
I'm thinking none of them don't. Like The Shape of Water is the closest one that might not, but even then it has a fish man. So it's still a creature in a way, right? It's not maybe a grotesque monster.
Black Lagoon.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's why I initially was pulled into Del Toro's work, which the first ones I ever watched were the Hellboy films, which are just like fun superhero romps, basically. They're really like, they're different, but they're really a precursor to the Marvel movies, I find. It's very much the same format, same formula.
Well, he directed Blade 2.
He did direct Blade 2, which is kind of like, that's one of those early 2000 superhero movies, you know, like your Daredevils and the like. It's better, but it's still got that 2000s edge. But I think that the Hellboy movies are interestingly close to what Marvel's formula was. I know they came out around the same time. The Golden Army came out in 2007, while Iron Man came out in 2008, I believe. But I was initially pulled in with those, and then on to like Pacific Rim, and then going back and seeing some of his more dramatic works once I, wasn't just a 13-year-old kid that only cared about things blowing up. And I went back and like watched this film, and I watched The Devil's Backbone, and I just very recently watched Crimson Peak and Shape of Water, of course. But he's got.
What about
like
Chronos?
I have not seen Chronos yet. I had no way to find it.
I think
but
that might be my favorite of his.
Oh yeah, I have to watch it still. It's on that Canopy app that I had found. The library one.
It also has Ron Perlman in it. Yeah, he told me about
that.
Yeah,
I know it has it in it, actually. because I do have like a couple of books that go over his whole filmography and such that talk about those experiences. And Ron Perlman obviously is a very good friend of Del Toro and works with him quite a lot. But Pan's Labyrinth is the one I keep coming back to as that kind of.
Do you have the Criterion Pan's Labyrinth?
No,
Why not?
because it's expensive. I have I have the Mondo X steelbook of it.
Yeah, I don't care what kind of fucking packages in. I care about how the movie looks.
Yeah, I know. But I bought that before I was into collecting Criterion. Yeah, so no, I don't have the Criterion. It's one that I want to pick up eventually, but it's also like I want to buy them individually, but I was also kind of wanting to just buy that triple pack that they have.
The triple pack is nice, but it is so oddly sized that
Yeah,
it
I know.
doesn't fit well in with the rest of your collection.
I know.
And there's nothing different in that set.
Right, so it's better off almost just buying. Well, no, it's expensive though. Like I think it's, I don't know. I'll have to check the prices on them all again, but I know when I was buying Pan's Labyrinth, when I bought the steelbook instead of the Criterion was like $65 on Canadian Amazon.
Yeah, I bought the trilogy for $45.
Oh yeah,
I did, because they were having a sale on Amazon.
The trilogy is $92.81, and then all three of them individually are $42.
Yeah. So
that's why I don't. Yeah. Well, I mean, I just bought the Mulholland Drive one, which was I think $36. So.
Man, you buy way too many movies.
Says you.
I can't imagine buying that many movies at once. That's just ridiculous.
Anyway, so what Del Toro movies have you not seen? Just The Shape of Water?
The Shape of Water I have not seen, and I have not seen Pacific Rim.
Oh no. Do you like old like monster movies? Like the old Godzillas and all that?
Yeah, I know, like kaiju stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, they're fine.
Okay.
I just, it's like when it starts to go into the action scenes and is literally just all animated, my mind just goes to sleep.
There is a lot of that in that one, but it does have a bitchin' soundtrack. Let me tell you that. Mm-hmm. I'll send you the main theme for it later. The guitar riff is like, it gets me so fucking hyped every single time.
What is it, Junkie XL?
No, I don't think so. Now I'm curious on who did it. Oh, it was Ramin Djawadi, or however you pronounce it. The guy that does Game of Thrones and Westworld's music.
Never heard of that.
Wow, you make that joke every single goddamn time. Every single fucking time. But anyway.
I can't grow out of it, man.
Speaking of not growing out of it, a very big concept in a lot of Del Toro films is the idea of childhood and innocence. And I know it was something that you, what's the right word, were apprehensive about, I suppose. Especially once we rewatched this one in preparation for the cast. I had given it 5 stars and you had only given it 4. So I had to ask what was up. And that was what one of your reasonings was that you think that, you say that all of his stuff is through the lens of a child, which is okay, but it didn't exactly click with you.
Right. I mean, I think the thing is not just the fact that like the child is the lead, but it's like every character is written as though seen through what a child would perceive, which is like almost like completely subjective at that point. And I like when you have I really don't like children in movies. I think there are very few movies. I think you can name them probably on one hand, the movies that like have great child performances that are also seen through those eyes as a main character. So I just think it's really hard to pull off. And that aspect is like the characterization and the depth of the problems that are in the film are almost dumbed down to an extent, just because it wouldn't make sense for a child to be able to understand the complexities or understand the nuances that you would only get through experience and wisdom. And so rather than there being like adults that actually exist in the world and then the child just happens to be the main character, it's everything is through the eyes of the child. So everything's colored by what the child knows or what the child has experienced. So it's probably only a subtle nuance, and it probably wouldn't annoy most people. And it's not like it even necessarily annoys me. It's just the fact that it's a storytelling device that doesn't resonate.
Right.
But if I would have seen this movie when I was 8 to 12 years old, maybe it would have. But when I saw the movie, I mean, it came out when I was 27, and I don't think I didn't actually see it until I was in my 30s. So
Right. And now that was like 16, 40 something years ago.
12 years.
I guess one thing we talked about a while back when we were kind of, I think maybe when we watched this film, when I watched it at least, was kind of our first introductions to the genre of horror, I guess. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that really quickly, give a little background on us, because while this isn't necessarily a full-blown horror film, I can see it being a lot of, if children watch this as a fairy tale kind of film, it could be a lot of people's introductions to more horrific scenes and more horrific elements. Certainly monsters, but...
Well, I mean, but Pan's Labyrinth is rated R, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So, I mean, to me, I don't think I would even consider it. I mean, it's definitely a fairy tale, but I would consider it more in the realm of like fantasy and
Right.
definitely like a war film.
Yeah.
So I would think that the people that would like this are probably the same people that are into like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And it's not so much like Chronicles of Narnia.
Right. Darker stuff, not like more allegorical stuff.
And speaking of which, like I had said earlier about maybe if I would have seen it as a kid, maybe I would fall in love with it. But then at the second way that I think about it, like Dark Crystal and Labyrinth were hugely popular when I was a kid, and I just thought they were okay too.
Right.
So it's like maybe I wouldn't have liked, because that's the thing, is like it has a dark slant. So it's a movie with kids in it, but then it's rated R, so it's not really a movie for kids. So it doesn't go dark enough for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's like a lot of things, and that's what some of it is like you could read into it that she can't handle the reality, therefore she is creating this fantastical world.
Right.
And so we're actually being sheltered from the really horrific things. Whereas I would rather her go catatonic and be off in her own world, but then us as the audience gets to see what's actually going on.
Yeah.
Because to me, the actuality is way more interesting than someone going off into their own fantasy world.
Right.
Or at least can be.
Yeah. And see, maybe it's an issue with one or the other. Well, it tries to kind of have both.
Right.
Maybe
and I'd rather it
all
be like
into the war, because there's that scene where the colonel or whatever bashes the guy's head in with the bottle.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little brutal for like through the eyes of a kid or whatever. And then, but at the same time, you have all those fantasy elements. So maybe it's something of like he could have went all fantasy or all war, essentially. Either show it fully through her eyes or just have her be like kind of like what The Devil's Backbone was, where it's like he's just kind of off in his own world while the rest of the world is going on.
Right.
But it kind of has that both and that middling ground, because I find myself throughout the movie wanting there to be more fantasy parts. There's the part where the fawn comes back and gets pissed off at her for killing his fairies, getting his fairies killed, I mean.
Right.
And he disappears for like 40 minutes, and I'm like, no, but I like the fantasy parts and I want more of that. So maybe if it was more consistent, maybe it was a more like a fantasy, maybe it would have clicked a little more for you, because I still do like all the parts of it, but I don't know, I do wish it was more fantasy, and maybe that was why I liked something like The Shape of Water as much as I did, because it is kind of like this consistent the entire time of what it is.
Right. And it's not like I hated it and thought it was a terrible movie and rated it poorly.
Well, you did rate it a 1 star.
Like it actually, the fact that is like I can appreciate the amount of work that went into it, and the fact that he's creating a distinct world that's different, and it has a lot to do with either fairy tales that he grew up with or he enjoyed the writing of, and then like the things that were going on in his country at that time. So it's like a
Right.
little bit of going back through a history lesson and then the stuff of his own childhood and weaving it into the stuff that he's interested in. So I can tell it's a very personal movie to him, you know. So I don't want to take anything away from that, and it's crafted well, and they
Yeah.
spend a lot of time and budget on it. But it's just because it's personal to one person doesn't mean it's personal to everybody watching.
Yeah.
Is all.
He's very much, I think, an auteur in the ways that almost Lynch is in a different way, where it's just very much singularly his vision throughout the entire film.
Yeah, I mean, this is basically his Roma.
This is essentially his Roma, long sweeping sort of camera movements and, well, Spanish.
Right.
And I would love to see him maybe go back and make another Spanish film. But I don't know if he'll do that now, or he's gotten the taste for Hollywood. But like Hollywood also doesn't fund any of his projects, so
Yeah, I think that's the problem. Is his is going to be restricted by budget because of his visuals. Like, I don't know if he could actually do a small film.
mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe he can, but it seems like a lot of his films have been either bigger budgeted or more like spectacle.
Yeah. Well, I forget what the budget. The budget on Shape of Water was fairly small, but like Pacific Rim was a big budget. Hellboys were both big budget. Crimson Peak was fairly big, I'm pretty sure.
Yes. So
Because
Shape of Water was $19.4 million. It says on IMDb.
yeah, I just had a 20 million rough estimate when I just googled it. Meanwhile, Crimson Peak had a budget of 55. Pan's Labyrinth was made on 19.
Whereas like Moonlight was 1.5 million.
Yeah. Pacific Rim was 180 million. 180 to 200 million for Pacific Rim. Which, Pacific Rim did okay. Did well enough to get a sequel 8 years too late or whatever. But maybe, and especially because Crimson Peak didn't make all too much money either. Maybe he's better off working with a smaller budget because there's not as much of a demand for films like that, for the films like The Shape of Water, where it's not going to be like your next Avatar. It's not going to make $4 billion. But it's like maybe, but his visions, like you said, they do demand such a high budget. But I think he's really good at stretching that budget as well. But I don't know, maybe he needs like an A24 to come in and give him just like a low budget, full control kind of thing and see what he does with it. Because what if he just did a small scale thing for like $5 million? Who knows what it could do?
I would really like to see him do just a straightforward film that doesn't have any fantasy elements at all.
That would be interesting.
I don't know that he would do it, but I just think it would be interesting to see his storytelling devices. I mean, because that's one of the things. Like he very much so stays in that same genre, even though like I know Crimson Peak is more like a gothic romance film, but it's like everything has those visual horror elements and those types of characters. I would just like to see him step completely away from it and just do something completely different.
I would agree. I mean, like I'm always down for him to do anything really.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, definitely if he moved away from fantasy for film to see what it was like, even like Lynch did straight story, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you move away from those, like, from what you're in.
I mean, it was like even Elephant Man. I mean, if you go,
sure.
like, he went from Eraserhead to Elephant Man.
Yeah.
And so even though those are both black and white, they're both like darker psychologically. It's it's a biopic. It's completely different, and the actors and the way that it's structured and everything is completely different type of film.
See, like he's written, it wouldn't be small scale, but apparently he has a full script written for a ton of movies, and one of them is The Count of Monte Cristo, which is just a story I guess that he loved, that he wrote a script about. And it's just scripts that he has finished that haven't been turned into projects yet. But that's something, it wouldn't be small scale, but it wouldn't be fantasy either, probably.
Well, I mean, the thing is with Monte Cristo, I mean, okay, the ending you'd probably have to have more of a budget for, but there's a great deal of that movie that just takes place in prison.
In a prison, yeah.
Yeah. So
even if you just,
I mean, I like the one with Guy Pearce, but apparently nobody else liked that movie.
I've seen that like a long time ago. I can't remember it at all. And the other guy, Jim something, Cazeville.
Yeah, something like that. The one that played Jesus
Castelli Rock
in Passion of the Christ.
And who's going to be playing Jesus in Passion of the Christ 2 Electric Boogaloo?
He's thirsty for more dance moves.
But no, Pan's Labyrinth is really just this this adult fairy tale like we were talking about. It is rated R, and it is dark and brutal at times, and unrelenting in that brutality. And it's not really for kids, but it's presented as if it is.
Right.
It's very interesting. And, you know, Ophelia is given 3 tasks by the fawn to do. And what do you think about those tasks? None of them are very long sequences. I think the longest one is the Pale Man, and it's like 5 minutes.
Yeah, it almost feels like there's like short stories that, you know, that are just kind of like plopped in there. Yeah, there was quite a bit in the special features on the Criterion disc about like motivations, and like he feels like one of the things in fairy tales is there's a lot of things that don't make sense, so he tries to write that into his screenplays, things that just don't really make sense and they just happen. And because he said that he doesn't really like scripts where a person like maybe necessarily has like a clear goal in mind, and so it's like point A to point B to point C, that when someone is telling a fantasy story they go, this happens and then this happens and then this happens, and that's how he likes his storytelling.
So I think what a lot of fairy tales are like, though, too. And then they did this, and then they went here. But, you know, I like that kind of element in terms of stuff like the chalk, where the fawn pulls out the chalk and he's like, just draw this on the ground. It'll make a door. Don't ask. That's what it does. Here you go.
Right.
Just move past it kind of stuff. I think it helps to build that world. It's really interesting world building, because you can almost argue, like you said, is it all or is it legit? Did she just make it all up to try to cope with all this stuff, or is this fantasy stuff actually there? We'll never know.
It's just a movie. You know, one of the things I also thought was really interesting about this film is the set design. It had that lived in feel, but it also had that fantastical feel.
Right.
Like the captain's room, the way it's built, it makes it look like the inside of a watch.
Well, it's kind of to represent that, like, that story that was told of him when he was a kid and his father's watch breaking, I guess. But
right, and it's supposed to like represent like his mind being troubled, you know, and everything. And it's like there was a lot of like where the little girl was like hiding and like peering at him, and the way like the camera movement was, like they used a lot of like the space and being able to like show everything. I thought that was neat. Just like the way like the forest and the path and the color grading of those sets, because I don't know how many of those things were actual on-site sets, because I know he did some filming, and how much of it was green screen.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of it was on sets. I would think. I wouldn't think he did too much green screening, because pretty much it's entirely practical.
Right. It's like even like the fawn's legs were like practical.
Yeah, it's all Doug Jones
digitally removed. Ducky Jones. They digitally removed his legs from it so that it, you know,
Dougie Jones
worked better. Got to get him some coffee. Well, I feel like I'm doing all the talking here.
What? Well, a set design that I really like, again, and we didn't really talk about this at all, other than I just mentioned it was 5 minutes long. The Pale Man, that entire sequence is just top next level shit. That entire sequence, that his room with the gigantic table full of food and all of like the tableaus on the walls of him stabbing and eating children, and all the way down to like him sitting with both of his hands on the table with his eyes right in front of him on the table as well. It's just so goddamn creepy in like this really, I guess, childlike way, you know, like I don't know if something like that, I think it's just generally creepy. I was going to say, I don't know if something like that would creep me out if I wasn't a kid, but no, it's genuinely creepy, I think. And then the entire thought of like almost the forbidden fruit. Don't eat the food or he'll wake up and come eat you kind of thing.
Right.
But it's almost like she's tempted to eat the food. And like those grapes, I don't even like grapes. Those grapes look fucking good. Right? they're like big and round and like, oh man, they would be so juicy and delicious. And she just bites the whole thing. Like she just puts it all in her mouth. She doesn't bite it at all. She doesn't get those juices going at all. What the hell's up wrong with her? She's a monster. But like, I love the hallway that she escapes in as well, with like those half pillars on the side and that wall at the back. Like, how would you get into the Pale Man's palace or whatever you want to call it if you didn't have that chalk door? That's what I'm wondering. What if, or like, so like, is that story just made up? Like, it could be she makes it up or whatever, and that's why there's those holes in like that. Why isn't there a door? Or how do you get there if you don't have the chalk, kind of thing? Or it's like, what if the fawn is just trapping children into going in there? What if there's like a blood pact between him and the Pale Man? Because both are played by Doug Jones. Conspiracy.
Well, Del Toro actually talks about that in the special features on the Criterion disc.
Oh, yeah.
Is the fact that fairy tales, or where he makes movies, I guess in Mexico or whatever, that the people just watch it and accept it for what it is, but
Right.
that in America people will ask why or what, or that it doesn't add up, and he thinks that is like a lower way of watching film, and so he doesn't like the fact that the Americans ask so many questions.
He almost likes the kind of just strap yourself in and enjoy the story kind of thing.
Right. That he doesn't want to have to answer what the producers or what the audience have questions for. He just wants them to experience the story he's telling.
Which, I mean, if he wants to do that, that's totally on him, right? He can go for it, but embrace it, and he does, I think, and it works because he goes for it 100% in that ideal, and he never pulls back at all. Because if he did try to explain some things like that, I feel like there'd be that tonal mismatch. But again, because like I said, we don't know where the chalk comes from or how it has that power, or like what it really does or anything like that. And thus we don't really care. Where's the door to the Pale Man's place? Like, why did the frog just like vomit up its entire insides? It's just one of those embrace it and go for it, but he owns up to it the entire time, and I think that's why it works so effectively. There, Garrett, happy I fucking talked about the set design.
Yay! Look at you go.
Any other sets? Do you like any other of them?
I mean, like the labyrinth that the fawn is actually in is neat,
with the circular staircase kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's statue at the bottom.
I kind of expected that to be in it more. It's like, especially in the trailers, it was kind of like the fawn and the guy with no eyeballs on his head were. I thought like the majority of the movie would be in the fantasy realm,
right?
It's really limited as to how much of that is in it, and that one character's only in it for that one scene, basically.
Yeah, the Pale Man. Now there's a sort of obvious sense of creativity that just oozes throughout this movie. Ew, I shouldn't use the word. It's gross. But he really does craft this just incredible world, and I know he talks a lot about sort of the finer details of Spanish and Mexican mythology and lore, and incorporating that into a lot of different films. There's a little bit of that, I think, in some aspects here, but really this is just the brainchild of one guy. There's stories where he has these notebooks filled with pages of drawings and ideas and concepts for monsters and characters and worlds and all that. And Pan's Labyrinth was sort of no exception. There was like almost hundreds of pages, I think, worth of details into this world and how he wanted to build it. And there's an interesting story where he actually left it in a cab, all of it, all of his entire thoughts for Pan's Labyrinth years before he wanted to make it. Only like right before he was about to go into production with it, he was hemming and hawing about whether he should make it, and then he left the notebook on the cab, so all of his work was gone, and he had nothing to work from if he did want to make it, so he couldn't really make the film. But the cab driver, I guess, found the notebook realized after looking through it how important it was, and drove back to where he dropped off Del Toro and found him and gave him it back. And I guess Del Toro took that as a sort of, I guess, message sign of like, okay, I should probably make this thing. If the Notebook didn't just get lost to time and it somehow made its way back to me, it must be a sign of like, you got to make this right now before you use it again.
And the rest is history.
The rest is in fact history. I just wanted to, throw that out there. There's also some really weird sense of dark irony I find in the movie, particularly, and I don't know if you'll have any other examples. But there's particularly after the part where he kills the doctor, he shoots and murders like the only person that can give good medical attention on the entire compound. And then immediately his wife goes into labor and like there's complications and she dies. So the entire time with that, it was like, oh man, if I only had a doctor. It's almost like his own malice is what did her in, kind of thing.
Right.
Then at the same time, when he gets Joker, this came out before The Dark Knight. Did Chris Nolan rip this off for the Joker? Thoughts? What if Pan's Labyrinth, but both sides Joker?
Every time I watch a really bad action movie on Amazon from the late 80s, early 90s, especially PM Entertainment ones, I'll watch them with Dustin. And there is constantly stuff that's in Christopher Nolan movies, and I constantly say my reoccurring joke in those movies is that he's stealing from these
films.
My
gosh.
So
maybe he's a thief like Tarantino. But when he gets his face all mangled up, it's like, if I only had a doctor, maybe you could fix that.
Well, that's one of the things too that Del Toro said visually he wanted to show is that characters that are ugly on the inside, by the end of the movie, they're also ugly on the outside.
Right.
And it's not, I don't know if it would necessarily be considered ironic, but at the end, spoilers, when the baby is being given away and he's like, everyone should tell him what his father's name was.
No, he says what time his father died because like of the watch thing.
Yeah. And that's what it was. And then they're like, he won't even know. Yeah. And then blam. Yeah. So he gets that moment before he actually dies to realize.
Which is so good. I love that moment.
Right.
I love that line of like, he won't even know your name. And it's just so cold and harsh and like, fuck you, we're moving on. Speaking of moving on, that kind of moves us on to the ending of the film, I suppose. And what do you think about that final sequence where she sort of, I guess, transcends into the fantasy afterlife? The blood of an innocent is the last code, so give me your brother and I'll stab it with this big ass knife.
Yeah.
But of course her blood is what triggers the event because she is the innocent.
I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit of a cop-out of having this dark of a movie and then having that happy of an ending.
But at the same time, it's sort of a happy ending, but it has that moment where they're like, welcome to the fantasy afterlife. And then it does like a hard cut back to the real world where she's just like cold, lifeless eyes and bleeding out. And everybody's crying and then the movie ends. So it's kind of like, it's again back to that having it both ways kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which in some way builds ambiguity.
But I don't think it really could be where there's either way where they're like, I don't think Del Toro thought of both sides equally and made the film to where both sides equally worked. It's like you could tell that he believes the fantasy worlds are real and he believes that the afterlife stuff is what she's getting rewarded.
Which is what the story is like, just be pure and you'll make it to the afterlife. What?
Yeah, and I think that for me personally, that message in a movie like is stupid.
And this is the first episode of the Digital Drive-In where Garrett absolutely hates the movie and everything it stands for.
To me that's extremely naive.
Right. But maybe that's part of the whole childlike thing. There is that nativity. I don't know.
Yeah.
To childhood.
And I'm also not trying to tell Del Toro how to make his own films and what I think he should have wrote them as, or
Yeah,
anything,
like he's listening to this.
right. But I mean, it's like I don't want even the audience to presume that I think I know how it should be, and therefore all
Right.
movies should be this way. I'm just saying the reason why it doesn't resonate with me, and I don't rate it higher or as high as you do, is because these things don't ring true to me, and
Yeah.
I think the fantasy levels are almost to the levels of like losing your mind and just imagining that there is a reality that doesn't actually exist and thinking that that's a happy story, where
Right.
it's actually more of a sad story.
Right. It is a very tragic tale, and it ends very sadly, like you say. Even if she is happy in the fantasy afterlife with all of them, she still got fucking shot and killed. Like, that's still brutal for a child, right?
Right. So it's like, how loving can her parents be if they completely abandoned her and allowed her to live this shitty life and get killed? Okay, they're all together now, but it's like that torture never goes away.
Yeah. What if she went to the fantasy afterlife and the colonel was just there as the king, and he's like,
yeah. I mean, that's if he wasn't a cartoon villain, that would be like a completely tragic story. Then it would almost be like a noir.
Yeah. Well, nothing you could, no matter what you do, you can't escape.
Right. And so if it was a nihilistic ending, I think that would actually be appropriate. It still wouldn't make up for the things earlier in the film, but I think that would be an interesting direction. It's like a Philip K. Dick story,
Yeah.
or fuck you, you lose.
But like at the end of the day, that's not what fairy tales are. Still, right? They do have that sort of, even if it's horrible throughout, they have the happy ending. They all live happily ever after.
And I don't like that.
And to some extent, then, I don't think you'll like The Shape of Water.
Probably not.
So don't pay for it. But when it comes to Netflix, eventually watch it when you have 2 hours or whatever. But
like if Amazon Prime, I'm sure we'll get it at some point.
Because, like, without spoiling anything, this is very much closer to that. These two films are very, very much the same. They're almost companion pieces in a way. One is through the eyes of a child and one not, but they're very similar films. Except for the fact that I guess one is maybe grounded in reality. That being Shape of Water, where it's like there's not that disconnect between the two. Like, everybody's in the same world. There's not like the war part and the fantasy part. It's all like together as one.
Right.
But who knows? Maybe you will like that. Do you like the old monster movies from like the 30s and stuff?
Oh, you do remember I'm a Mystery Science Theater fan.
So yes.
No. So all those movies are to be made fun of.
Right.
Right.
Well, then maybe you really will hate this.
Yeah, I don't know.
Who knows?
Mean, the only Del Toro film I've seen at the theater, like during release, was Hellboy.
Was what?
So everything else
I didn't even hear.
Was
Hellboy 1 or 2?
Yeah, first one.
The first one.
That's the only one I saw.
Hated everything else.
No, I again, visually as a comic book, and I like Ron Perlman, but it's not like my favorite comic book series.
Right.
So, I will when it comes to where I can see it without spending money, I will check it out.
Would you watch? Are you gonna watch Pinocchio when it comes out to Netflix?
Pinocchio? What the fuck's that?
It's his next movie. He's directing Pinocchio, co-directing. But
why?
He's mostly directing because he wants to do it. It's going to be a dark adaptation of Pinocchio, not like a Disney remake. Stop motion animation.
Let me ask you this: have you seen the fucking Disney movie?
Yeah, a long time ago.
Dark as fuck.
Oh man, when the guy transforms into the fucking donkey.
Right, and then like the whale tries to like kill them and swallows them whole, and like
there are no strings on me.
Yeah, that's a fairly dark film, especially considering when it came out. Let's see, who is the other director? The guy who was the animation department head of Very Harold and Kumar Christmas. Really?
Actually, the Harold and Kumar Christmas, the animation part there is actually quite nice. Just the animation wise, I mean.
The thing is, there was already a dark Pinocchio movie. It was called AI.
That's true, but this is Del Toro Pinocchio. Apparently it's a musical too. What? Weird. Who knows? I mean, it'll probably end up getting canceled though.
Well, it's already gotten canceled once.
What? And no, it's still happening though. They must have brought it back. On the 2017 project was canceled. In 2018, they announced that he's brought on board. So what the fuck are you talking about? I still see that it's going on.
Right. So his idea for the project was canceled.
Yeah,
Netflix,
all of his projects get canceled though at one point or another.
Netflix then decided that they wanted to move forward with the stop motion animation, and they're going to use his concept art for that movie. That's why he was brought on as a second director. So it is not actually his original project and the idea that he had, but it is going to use the designs he created for that project that is canceled.
Interesting. In that case, I'm not excited for it anymore. You just killed all hype I had for the entire thing, you fucking asshole.
Good. Well, the thing is, it says 2021.
Yeah, that's way too far away from now. But what is his next project? That's my real question. Apparently it's that.
Well, I don't know. I don't think it's...
Oh, right. He's taken like a few years off or whatever. He's going on sabbatical.
Well, it says he's done screenplays. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Carnival Row,
That's
a
a TV show.
series. And Wizards, a TV series. And then something called Nightmare Alley.
Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is a TV show that's coming out too, or it was shot in Toronto, actually.
Yeah.
Which Shape of Water was too. Shape of Water was shot in Toronto and around Hamilton, so it's got like that nice little, not quite hometown because I'm not from there, but you know, it's Canada, bitch. That's where I live.
Fantastic.
Yeah, well, fuck you.
And the horse you rode in on.
Oh, do you have anything else for Pan's fucking Labyrinth?
Oh, I have some trivia here for you.
Okay, hit me with that fucking trivia. Hit me with those fun factoroonies. We haven't done that in a while.
Do you see what I just put?
Yes.
How the fuck do you even measure that?
I don't know. Literally just IQ. What if it's that? I don't even know.
Del Toro was ranked number 37 on Entertainment Weekly's The 50 Smartest People in Hollywood. Like, fucking serious? Because he reads books? I mean...
These stars all have extreme... Apparently, it says here. Number 1 is fucking Judd Apatow, is apparently the smartest man in Hollywood.
I hate everything. I hate everything.
There are no strings on me.
Fuck you, it's January.
Oh man, it is though, isn't it? Only shit is out in theaters right now.
I'm surprised they haven't released Star Wars.
Ha.
Look up in the sky, it's up in the sky.
All right, you got anything else for me on
No.
Pan's
No.
Okay.
No.
What do you want to do next week?
I think we should do well, do we have anything listed?
We have Batman vs Superman listed, but that's always
We should do Mulholland Drive next.
Why does it say Batman and Superman Dawn of Justice? Who wrote that?
You did.
Certainly wasn't me.
I don't know. You can do whatever you want.
All right, well, Batman vs Superman, in case you're out there listening, has been delayed. We ran out of time. That'll about do it in that case for this episode of the Digital Drive-In podcast.
Sure, man.
Of course, that was Pan's Labyrinth. We talked a little bit about it. We talked mostly just about Del Toro in general, which is fine. You'll get your money when you fix this damn door. But anyway, next week's Garrett's pick, which means it's here. It's happening. It's finally happening.
I didn't miss
many episodes.
The entire podcast.
I know. Okay, why don't you introduce it since it's your fucking You're gonna be jacking off to the thought of it.
It's Mulholland Drive.
What is Mulholland Drive? Why don't you go through it like I always do?
I'm
instead of
not-
sitting back and
no.
just fucking taking the. Whenever your birthday is, that's that week. You're gonna get to like host the podcast. That's my gift to you. You'll get to do all this part.
We better hurry up and do it then. It's February 4th.
That's like a month away, you fucking prick. We got time.
Yeah, but I know that.
Mulholland
I'm not going to
Drive will
explain
come
it
out
to you.
on the 25th.
You have to watch it.
Mulholland Drive, of course. This is all I wanted. Mulholland Drive, of course, is a David Lynch film because Garrett loves David Lynch and I hate him. No, because David Lynch is one of obviously our favorite directors here at the Digital Drive-In. If you haven't seen any of his work,
I want to marry him and have his babies.
if you haven't seen any of his works, they're all very, very weird and very bizarre and very awesome. Of course, Twin Peaks is something we talk about frequently, and even more frequently off the air because we're animals. And so what's going to be is we're obviously going to spoil the shit out of Mulholland Drive because it's going to be a podcast on that film. But we'll also be talking a lot, like we did today, about Del Toro, about the man himself. We're going to be talking a lot about David Lynch, about his works.
We're going to talk about Del Toro next week?
Yep. Probably quite a bit about Twin Peaks. I'm sure we'll get on a Twin Peaks rant, and it'll probably end up being the longest episode to date. So I'm already not excited to edit it. Here we go. Are you ready? Because I'm fucking
Never
not.
mind.
From the Digital Drive-In, this is Jimmy Hollywood signing out. No, I'm kidding.
You're not going to tell them about our Twitter accounts?
Well, I was just making a joke because I saw Jimmy Hollywood.
What about old Dookie Tom?
I don't even know what you were saying. Anyway, you can find us here every single week on the Digital Drive-In, wherever you get your fancy dancy
drive-ins are sold.
Wherever drive-ins are sold, and we may be on some other platforms other than your iTunes and all that coming out soon.
The diving platform down at the YMCA.
I have to deal with this every single week, everybody. Every single week. And sometimes
I want you to do things more like Funhouse. Why can't you do it that way?
I have a noose permanently tied in the corner of this room. And just one day in the middle of a cast, when he goes on some fucking bullshit like this, I'm just gonna
He's gonna masturbate.
I'm gonna go the fuck over and autoerotic asphyxiation myself. Damn. We'll slap a rope around my neck and call me David Carradine. That's a good orgasm.
Hands of steel.
Anyway, you can find us on Twitter at _digital fuck. You can find us on Twitter
at ampersand, $, and apostrophe.
You've worn me down. You've worn me down. You can find us on Twitter at digital_podcast, where you can follow us. Please, for the love of God, follow us for all of your podcasting needs and link dumps and such. You can follow me on Twitter at Alex's Reviews. You can follow Garrett on Twitter at Garrett Donardo. You can also follow us both on our Letterboxd, so you can stalk us like we stalk each other and see what movies we watch and when. And hell, if two movies happen to coordinate, maybe it's an upcoming episode. Who knows?
And if you want to tweet at us and request a movie, you can too.
You can totally do that too. No promises that we're actually going to do it, but at the same time, we basically make the shit up as we go along. There ain't no schedule, so have at her. And for the all your favorite Digital Drive-In needs, come on down. The price is right. Anyway, I'm fucking done with this. Bye.
Okay. Bye, Craig.